Okay, in this video we'll try to get some theoretical understanding on what is session and session factory. Basically, for any typical web application, you'd have requests from the client technologies. Maybe that the user has submitted a form, or maybe he is trying to log in. He entered his credentials and clicked on the login button. Whatever it is, the web server would actually forward that request to some kind of a controller logic. Now, depending on the design pattern and the mix of technologies that you're using, this could be a servlet or something else, but ultimately the request data would get sent to some kind of a business logic where we'll use that data to do something with it by interacting with the database. In case of Hibernate, we need to use so-called a session. We're supposed to create a session for each and every transaction that we are performing with the database. So let's say that we wanted to store that data. So for that, we have to actually create a session, which is a session object, and then using that session object, we'll interact with the database, do something with that data. It could be any of the CRUD operations. And then once you're done, we would take care of destroying that object as well. So for each and every request that has something to do with the database, we'd create a session object, interact with the database, and then close on that session. But we're not actually going to create these sessions, but rather we're actually going to ask this session factory to create a session for us. So session factory is another object that we're going to create, and we're going to create this by feeding the configuration file that we had configured for the database. I mean the Hibernate XML file. We're going to sort of get all the details from that configuration file, and using those details, we'll create a session factory for each and every single database that we have. So for each and every database, we're going to have one session factory created, and that's what this diagram talks about. We have a couple of databases here, and for each database, we have one session factory associated with them to help transact with that particular database. Now do take a note that these databases may not belong to two different database management system softwares. This could be two logical databases belonging to the same DBMS software. So if I create a couple of databases in PostgreSQL, then I have to take care of creating a session factory for each and every individual database. But we're not really going to create a session factory every once in a while, because creation of session factory is a very expensive process. It's going to demand a certain bit of processing power, and if you keep creating for each and every request that comes in, then it's going to degrade the performance of the application. So the session factory object would be created only once when we start the application, or during the first request that comes into the application when it starts, and from that point it would stay alive until we terminate the application. But we can't keep this session for long because session is not thread safe, and it's pretty lightweight as well. So it's okay to create a session object, or rather ask the session factory to create a session for us for each and every request that comes in. On the other hand though, session factory is thread safe and it can stay alive for a long time. So in our next video, we're going to explore the code inside the test.java where we've actually created the session factory object using the configuration file, and then we're going to ask the session factory to create a session to do some kind of a transaction. And that's why this is called a session factory. It acts like a factory to manufacture sessions. Well, we'll see in our example. So stay tuned.